to travel, journey, voyage, expedition, tour, pilgrimage, safari, odyssey, to boldly go where no one has gone before.
Welcome to our podcast, Travel Unravelled, an ISTM podcast sponsored by the International Society of Travel Medicine and IMAT, the International Association for Medical Assistance to Travelers. Welcome, everyone. We are back for another episode with us, Dr. Anne McCarthy, Dr. Sarah McGuinness, and Dr. Gerard Flaherty. Anne, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. We're missing Albie today.
That's right. He's taken a break.
Well, he's flying over in Tanzania today, I think. Dr. Sarah McGuinness, welcome.
Thank you so much, Aisha. It's great to be here and to represent the Southern Hemisphere in Albie's absence. So I'm an infectious diseases doctor from Australia. I'm based in Melbourne in the south, but I've also worked in Darwin in the tropical north of Australia and some places overseas. And my work life is a mix of running a travel clinic, doing research in infectious diseases and collaborating globally with fantastic people like you guys through organisations like the ISTM. And outside of work, I'm really passionate about travelling.
Yes, we actually bumped into each other in Copenhagen just a couple of weeks ago. And Anne, did you want to take the liberty of introducing our very exciting guest for today?
So we're very, very pleased today to have the current president of the International Society of Travel Medicine, Gerard Flaherty from Galway, Ireland, and we'll let him introduce himself. Gerard, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Anne. It's an absolute pleasure to be joining this elite cast of, by now, very experienced podcasters. I'm Gerard Flaherty, as Anne says, from Galway in the west of Ireland. It's a small city, 80,000 people, but its population grows significantly every year with tourists. It's a very popular tourist destination. I'm president of ISTM. It's a huge privilege to serve in that role. I work very closely with you all and with Anne as my president-elect. I shouldn't say my president-elect, as the president-elect. My academic position is Professor of Travel Medicine and International Health at University of Galway. And I also have very close involvement with the Faculty of Travel Medicine at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow. I also am a fellow of the Faculty of Travel Medicine of the Australasian College of Tropical Medicine, and indeed I'm delighted to have that connection with my colleagues in Australia.
We're delighted to have you as one of our international guests at our conference later this year. So today I've volunteered to guide the chat so that Aisha can share some of her thoughts and expertise on this topic. And today we'll be talking about the health benefits of travel. So as travel doctors, we spend a lot of time talking about the very scary parts of traveling, like the dangers and the risks. Why do you all think we focus so much on risk?
We focus a lot on risk because the travel medicine encounter is a limited amount of time, and a lot of travelers really don't understand the risks they might be at. And so we try and use that time efficiently, which means you can't really spend a lot of time outside of trying to decrease those risks.
We tend to be trained in discussing disease, communicating that, and maybe not as focused as we might be on promoting good health, on actually discussing wellness with our patients. But as Anne says, the travel consultation is very time limited. We do have to be quite creative in terms of introducing some discussion around promoting wellness and maybe validating the traveller's decision to travel in the first place. I think travellers like to hear us talk a little bit about the benefits of travel and not being overly negative. But we do need to balance that with the discussion, of course, of the risks. We are experts in risk assessment and risk mitigation, after all.
I guess maybe we cater to what we think the patient has come to see us for, and the expectation is often that we're going to talk to them about risks and about the things we can do to mitigate those risks.
But yeah, I think it's important that we also talk about the benefits to health. And I think this is a really interesting topic that we have Gerard on to speak about today, because he's done a lot of work and research in this field and promoting travel as a healthy option and a healthy lifestyle practice. So Gerard, tell us a little bit more about what do you mean that travel can be good for your health?
Oh, thanks, Aisha. So it has been up to now quite a neglected subject in travel medicine. But I think, many people consider this to be, an inherent part of travel. Do we recognize it as of benefit? Now, I should say that some travelers are traveling under very difficult and distressing circumstances. So many migrants are forced to travel, really not so much to live, but to survive. And so I'm talking mostly about the leisure traveler. I might quote Shakespeare when he said that, "Be wary then, best safety lies in fear." So that's in, discussing the risks of travel. But we don't want to make the traveler too fearful, do we? We want to make sure that we talk about some of the positive aspects. William Shedd said, "A ship in harbour is safe, but that is not what ships are for." So it is important to explore, to see beyond our immediate area and to explore the horizons. But there's growing evidence for the health benefits of travel. And you can consider the physical health benefits for people who are apparently well, or for people with some chronic medical condition, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and so on. But there's also, significant mental health benefits as well. And I did a sort of a trends analysis of this, again, using a well-known search engine, and found that, since COVID-19, there's much greater interest in this topic. So I think COVID had an effect on our consciousness around travel. When people were locked down for extended periods, they had more time to think about, what they might do in the future once the lockdowns are lifted. And we did see significant resurgence in travel, but hopefully we will also, take a very responsible approach to future travels. And I think COVID has also taught us about the importance of our natural environment as well and preserving that.
You don't know what you've got till it's gone, right?
That's probably a song, is it? That sounds familiar.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So today's breakdown for the podcast will be the physical benefits, the mental benefits, and the sociocultural benefits of travel. Is that correct, Gerard?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to break it down, Aisha, yeah.
You said you've done a lot of trekking, so I can't imagine why being in a hypoxic state would be good for your health. But maybe there is some benefit, so maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to take that specific example, there is research showing us that being at moderate altitude for a few weeks at a time in those who have what we call metabolic syndrome, where they have a clustering of risk factors for heart disease and type 2 diabetes, that's actually very beneficial for them. It actually improves the good form of cholesterol in the bloodstream, which is really important. That protects us against heart disease. And also it improves patients' blood sugars. Again, it's only been studied in that particular population. Does it do that for all travellers? I don't think we fully understand that. There's much greater need for research on this. Alpine therapy is a term. This is where people really go to the high mountains in order to get some respite from some relief from air pollution. And so the air is so clean. There's definitely less particulate air pollution in high altitude environments. At maybe 1,500 meters to 2,000 meters, there can be significant improvements in the patient with the adult with asthma and their ability to breathe. We measure a lung function called forced expiratory volume in 1 second. How quickly can you breathe out? And in asthma, that's typically reduced, and other lung conditions as well. But this actually improves at high altitude. So those two benefits alone are quite fascinating. It's not the reason most people I know go to high altitude, but it does sort of validate their decision to go there, right?
One thing I think about is the forest walks and stuff and the forest travel, which are popular in places like Japan and other places, which really speak to mental health and meditation, but also the physical aspect and benefit of travel. Spending time within a forest environment, walking, meditation. Don't know about the bathing. I think you bathe yourself in the forest as opposed to jump into water.
Yeah, in fact, the Japanese have a name for this called Shinrin Yoku. And in Japan, you have these forest therapists who prescribe forest bathing. We reviewed the known literature on it, and it's really fascinating to think that trees and plants release chemicals. Now, they do this anyway. They need to fight off disease, so they have these antibacterial and antifungal chemicals they use to fight off disease of their own organism. But actually, humans inhale these. They're volatile compounds, and they're in the air when you're in the forest at very high concentrations. You have some houseplants behind you there. Some of them are being released from those houseplants right now. But these chemicals increase the body's own production of virus and cancer-fighting cells. They're called natural killer cells. It's a very aggressive name, but that's what they're called in medicine, as we know. And, they help to protect you against viral infections and even have anti-cancer properties. But there's a lot of research showing that your autonomic nervous system, the balance between overdrive and maybe being too relaxed, sympathetic versus parasympathetic, that's adjusted when you're in a forest environment in favor of increased parasympathetic tone, which is very good for your heart rate decreases, good for systolic and diastolic blood pressure, the high reading and the lower reading, good for reducing stress, helps people to sleep better, helps people to live with chronic pain better. So there's a whole load of benefits, but some of them at least are attributable to these chemicals, the phytoncides. So when you're in a forest the next time, remember, you're surrounded by living organisms. Now, I grew up surrounded by trees. I've always had a great love of trees. We are what we call biophiliac creatures as humans. We love green. We love living things and growth. People can do this at home, of course, but bear in mind there are many countries in the world with less than 1% tree cover. There's about 6 countries that have no forests at all. So not everybody can walk down to the local woodland. So yeah, I'm all for forest bathing.
I think that's really interesting, Gerard, because there actually have been some studies done on happiness where they talk about hedonic happiness, where there are experiences of pleasure and enjoyment, and eudaimonic happiness, where they talk about experiences of meaning and purposes. And a lot of these hedonic experiences that provide enjoyment and pleasure, over time, we adapt to them and we diminish the benefit that we get. But there's studies actually shown that nature and being in nature, we never actually adapt to it. So our levels of happiness actually sustain over time, which I think was really interesting. There is benefit from it. And you talk about, what did you call them? The
phytoncides.
Phytoncides.
Yeah.
But there's also, obviously our hormonal releases of dopamine and serotonin and all those other, happiness hormones that are released as well. So I think there is something to it that we need to be paying more attention to.
I think there is. We're very familiar in medicine, nursing, pharmacy with cortisol, that stress hormone. We need certain amounts of it, but too much of it can certainly be damaging to various bodily systems. But there's evidence for reduced levels of cortisol associated with different types of travel. Middle-aged men with risk factors for coronary heart disease, this is the biggest killer of people, really, premature cause of death. People who travel more frequently have a reduced risk, quite significant reduction in risk of fatal and non-fatal coronary heart disease. So the benefits for different types of traveller will vary, and won't be a one-size-fits-all. But we do need to do a lot more research for different travel contexts. But these are some of the general things.
I'm going to give one research study that found that women who vacation at least twice a year show a significantly lower risk of suffering a heart attack than those who only travel every 6 years or so. This is one of the studies that I read, but I would just like to say that I think that we need to go on more vacations.
We do. Maybe the scope for prescribing travel to some extent. We do prescribe exercise increasingly after all. So maybe in the future we'll see, move towards travel therapy. I don't want to encourage people to travel more in an irresponsible way. Much of the travel I'm talking about can occur domestically within your own country. Sarah and yourselves are from really huge countries by landmass. So you can travel your whole lives within your own countries without crossing borders and experience many of these things. But, some people are from countries where they just don't get exposure to enough sunlight, clean air, and to woodland. And so travel affords them that opportunity.
Gerard, you touched before on the COVID pandemic, and, that really significantly impacted how people could travel, or, that they could travel at all. And at the same time, we live in this digital environment where there's the pressure to be available or connected all the time. So can you talk a bit about the mental health benefits of travel and even using travel as a digital detox?
Certainly all of that is true. And there's some research looking at, using digital-free travel as an opportunity for people to unwind. I saw a wonderful poster at Luxembourg Airport a few months ago, and it said, I came to disconnect, I fully recharged. So, I think people increasingly recognize the need to reduce their scrolling and reduce time spent on social media. Social media has really affected how we travel. Some people are traveling just for the opportunity to develop their social media profile. I mean, social media influencers, that's actually a very, very important part of the work they do. Mental health benefits of travel, I mean, there are really so many. And, you know, there is evidence of improved sleep in some types of travellers. I mean, particularly those who are not morning larks, you know, they tend to sleep better. Business people tend to have more problems with sleep during travel. Insomniacs, of which there are really quite a few nowadays, tend to sleep better. We often think of sleep with the context of jet lag, but actually travel could be even beneficial for sleep. And there are studies looking at improvements in stress markers and improvements in people's mood. This seems to predate the travel experience as well as post-date it. So some of these effects last for quite some time. A study of people who are quite burned out, they took 3 to 4 weeks to return to pre-vacation burnout levels. It's a shame they had to return to those levels, but I mean, travel at least afforded them the opportunity to break away from that cycle, and probably does help people to break difficult cycles. I mean, I find travel gives wonderful perspective. I find the whole travel experience very relaxing. Now, some people don't enjoy airports. I enjoy even the bus to the airport. It's important to enjoy the whole travel experience and to be, as Anne said earlier, a mindful traveller. Live in the moment and, you know, don't be too worried about everything else. Let the pilots pilot the plane. So I think if you have the right attitude to travel, you can derive greater benefit from it. You know, the sociocultural benefits as well. You know, people I think probably become more tolerant, more open-minded, more resilient, which is a really important quality in any workplace. It fosters greater understanding of different cultures. There are a lot of these sort of intangible sociocultural benefits that really should not be dismissed, because they most likely make us better citizens, and we can pass on those values and experiences to the people we teach or the children we rear.
I think that's a very good point about the sociocultural benefit, especially since most of us live in mosaics of cultural experiences every day, and you can really appreciate more and more the people around you and wherever you live. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I agree, and I really think travel, you know, does broaden horizons significantly. An interesting study of people who were facing end of life found that the single most important thing for them on their bucket list was actually travel. 78% of them identified travel as the thing they most looked forward to as a bucket list item. You know, and they listed various particular travel experiences, and they weren't necessarily to your typical luxurious travel destinations. Many of them wanted to visit places that they always, you know, felt were important to visit, almost pilgrimages in a way. Some of them were maybe dark tourism destinations, but they really felt, you know, the need to do that. Hans Christian Andersen famously said, "To travel is to live." It's a longer quote, but that's what we all remember, right? If you look at the phrase, "to travel is to live," you could extract the word revitalize from that phrase. And I think travel does revitalize us. It gives us back some energy and maybe helps us to cope better with the demands of modern society.
And I'm just going to jump in here. For those who don't know what dark tourism is, it's basically a type of tourism where people go to see or learn about populations who may be living in more vulnerable situations, or maybe in, you know, a situation where they may be suffering. There have been companies that have set up, like, profiting to build an economy within these populations who may be suffering. So it's an interesting concept, right? Dark tourism.
Yeah, in fact, the CISTM conference, the conference of the ISTM, will devote a whole session to this at its conference next year in New Orleans. So, I mean, if you have an interest in exploring more about dark tourism, please register for our conference. It's not often discussed. I've read a few books on the subject. I think we've all probably visited some dark tourism destinations, but it's fascinating to consider the motivations of some travellers. And as you say, Aisha, it actually does and can build a lot of cultural understanding by visiting places that were sites of hardship and suffering. And I think it makes us potentially better human beings by developing a greater understanding of the world, and it makes us more flexible in our thinking as well, which is definitely a good thing.
I first learned about it actually when I was in Cape Town in South Africa, and I was meeting up with Albie, and I was going in to visit the Khayelitsha and the townships that had been expanding there. For those who don't know, it's an area where populations have gathered and built over 1 million people living in these townships on the kind of the outskirts of Cape Town. Albie was like, "Well, what are you going to do there?" And I said, "Well, I kind of wanted to see what the situation was like." And so this is kind of the how the topic was brought up. And there are a lot of ethical issues with that and a lot of safety issues that come along with it as well. So something to look forward to at CISTM. I want to go back a little bit to what you were talking about with maybe some of the psyche of travel and the mental health. And you talked about perhaps people looking forward to certain trips. I know there's a study that was done in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that talked about anticipation and how anticipation of an upcoming trip can actually boost happiness levels, and it can actually increase wellness, just looking forward to going on a trip. And I know you spoke about it in Copenhagen. I thought it was really fascinating. Can you speak a little bit to that psyche of planning and looking forward to a trip?
Aisha, I wish all of my students, my audience, were as attentive as you. So that was I just mentioned it briefly, but you picked up exactly on it. I'm from a family of 9. One of my sisters, very dear to me, she has a great attitude to life. And one of the things she always taught me was look forward to something. She took a lot of cruises in her earlier years in the Caribbean. And on the way home, she'd famously stop at a travel agent's and pick up the brochures. And she'd already be planning the next trip. Whether she went to the next trip or not, it didn't matter. But she was already reliving the moment and, anticipating the next opportunity. And anticipation has been studied, and you're quite right. Looking forward to a holiday increases people's wellness across a number of domains. Family, social, occupational, financial. People are happier when they have something to look forward to. We do know a little bit about, the right dose of travel. I don't want to put it that way, but if the travel duration is too short, you don't derive maximum benefit. But also if it's too long, it seems to have some negative effect. So a sort of a moderate travel duration seems to have the greatest restorative effect. And we do know that looking forward to some experience, actually has an effect on your brain. And here I'm going to use some jargon, but it causes activation on both sides of your brain, medial prefrontal cortex, outer layer of your brain at the front, very important part of your brain. Both sides light up when you do a functional magnetic resonance imaging scan. So in other words, you can actually see that part of the brain is being used when somebody is thinking about an experience. It doesn't light up to the same extent if you're thinking about some nice purchase. Not quite the same, but when you're thinking about an experience, it tends to light up. Now, there is need for a lot more research here, but there are indicators from the literature already that travel and the anticipation of travel can have very positive mental health benefits.
That's fascinating, Gerard. But I wonder, though, when we come back from travel, sometimes it feels like we've only just come back and we're already back into work and it's like it never happened. Is there also the possibility of having post-travel blues?
There is, Sarah. In fact, that is described in the literature. There's not a whole lot of literature on it. I think it can be minimized, though. I always recommend a buffer period when people come back from trans-meridian travel, when you're crossing time zones east or west in particular, that people give themselves a chance to recover and actually extend their travel experience. It is very hard to go back to work the same day. I mean, I've done it a lot over the years in the context of academic travel. I've arrived back that morning and I'm in work that day after I've got back home from the airport. That's not to be recommended. You really should give yourself a few days and, maybe plan your travel around that if you're back to work on a Monday, for example, that you arrive back on the Friday rather than on the Sunday.
And maybe the solution is to start planning your next trip so you can start looking forward to that one.
Correct, Sarah. And indeed, another advantage of that is that you won't have so many last-minute travellers. I mean, we did a study of people who travel last minute with 2 weeks or less before they depart. And, really quite a few travellers leave it to the last minute. We don't encourage that in travel medicine because we need time for travellers potentially to complete courses of travel vaccinations. But there are times when, last minute travel is unavoidable. You can get deployments on humanitarian missions and so on. But yeah, you're right. Plan it well ahead of time and be sensible about the return, because of course then flights can be delayed, and then somebody might find that the return journey, neutralizes to some extent the health benefits of the trip. They're very relaxed from their holiday, and then they have a nightmarish return with cancelled flights, missed connections, all because the connection was too tight in the first place. Bring medications that we sometimes prescribe for self-treatment in your hand luggage, on your person on the airplane, because some of the illnesses that we're trying to prevent can manifest on the flight home. So you need to make sure that you're prepared for that. But yes, don't go back to work straight away.
So we've talked about the benefits of travel and some of the reasons, but maybe we can just take a minute to explore, why do people travel?
The motivations for travel vary a lot, and most travelers in studies tend to be leisure travelers, but there's lots of different types of leisure experiences. Some are going on beach vacations, some want to see sights, some are very interested in cultural experiences, visiting museums and galleries and so on. We see a lot more ecotourism, I think, now, and a lot of that can actually be very good for the destinations. Very often you can help local conservation efforts by choosing tours that take a very responsible approach. There are push and pull factors, I suppose. People sometimes travel to escape from something. That can be a reasonable motivation, but you need to be careful. If somebody is very unclear what they're escaping from and they have unresolved baggage, if you like, from their own country, it might be better to deal with that first before they travel, because that baggage will often be transported with them,
So I think we can all agree that travel is one of life's great pleasures. But as travellers, we also have a duty to respect the people and the places that we visit. And in today's world where we're facing climate change, we've got poverty, political unrest, I think it's more important than ever to travel responsibly. So Aisha, can you tell us a little bit more about what responsible travel means?
I think it's really important to recognize the impact that we have as travelers. There's 2 points that I want to kind of touch on, and it kind of goes along the idea of types of footprints. And we talk about when we travel, leave only footprints behind and take nothing and leave nothing. As part of the responsible travel interest group with the International Society of Travel Medicine, we talked about developing the idea of the health footprint. And this, what we were talking about, was really more expressed as a measure of medical resources that may be used while you're traveling, whether that's due to potential illness or injury. But the other thing to look about when we talk about health footprints is, not just health resource utilization, but things like, how do travelers and the types of medications that we're using, for example, for travelers' diarrhea, contribute to things like antimicrobial resistance in the places that they're traveling to, as well as things like ethical and behavioral considerations when it comes to vaccines, and also travelers being potential sentinels for disease, and are we potential vehicles to spread disease. And we saw this in COVID, where in the beginning, COVID was a travel disease, and it really was introducing populations and vulnerable populations to this disease. The other aspect of it is the climate footprint. And when I talk about climate footprint, we know that obviously, we're in a heat wave right now in Canada. Temperature in Toronto today is 40 degrees Celsius. We know that climate change is having an impact on the traveler, and where they, the options that they may be able to go to because of rising water levels, or even things like heat waves, right? Like where people, I know Gerard goes up north now to those, what were those islands that you went to?
Last year was the Faroe Islands.
Yeah, he went to the Faroe
halfway
Islands
between Iceland and Norway,
because he was looking for a cooler destination than the heat wave they were having down in the Mediterranean. So it's interesting because it'll impact it, but I think it's really important to look at how traveler can also impact climate. We know that tourism, for example, has contributed to about 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. But something we don't often talk about is food waste. And if you think about, the food waste that we often see when we travel, and I know we all may have experiences in hotel buffets, or resort buffets, or cruise buffets, or buffets in general, but also like portion sizes and the amount of food that you and I love eating. That's one of my motivations to travel, is to try different types of food, but being cognizant of wastage. And if you actually look at food wastage, if you compare it to a level of a country, it would actually be the third largest country emitting greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide after the United States and China, if food waste from traveling were a country. So that's pretty significant.
So I think that's really given us some food for thought. Aisha, what advice can you share with our listeners as they plan the next trip for what they can do to be a more responsible traveler?
So what can we do, right? I mean, we talk about these and it's like, it can be overwhelming. One of the first, when we talk about the health footprint, is how can I make myself healthy as a traveler so that I'm not a potential burden on the places that where I may go to, or a potential risk to the local communities. And one of the top ways that we know, and we talk about this often in travel medicine, is getting vaccinated, right? There are a lot of vaccine preventable diseases that we vaccinate for in travel medicine, but we also talk about protecting yourself from potential disease outbreaks, which can be transferred, and vector-borne or mosquito-borne diseases and other diseases like that. When we look at climate and options for that, I think one of the things to think about is, why are you traveling? And is there a necessity to travel? And can you use means of travel which may be more environmentally friendly? France actually made a huge move 2 years ago where they banned short haul flights if you could get to somewhere in less than 2 hours, there is no longer a flight available for that if you could go by train or vehicle, which is unprecedented. The other thing is also being respectful, right? Is, I think, part of our responsible travel, and the impact, the mental impact, the psychological impact that we can have on people and communities. I think we need to learn about people's culture, to try to learn, maybe phrases, and understand some of the behaviors that we do that may be offensive to other populations. And, volunteerism, for example. I know very often people go with good intention to volunteer at an orphanage or whatnot, but I know very well of organizations who set up orphanages, and know that there are resources out there that are looking at this to help guide some of the decisions and choices that we make as travelers. And I know the International Society of Travel Medicine is making an effort, and we've made some infographics, for example, on the health footprint, on things like sex tourism, on volunteerism, and these are available as resources through the International Society of Travel Medicine. But there are other organizations like Travelist and Sustainable Travel International, which are looking at changing the algorithm. For example, when you Google something, when you're looking for a trip, the organizations that are a little bit more sustainable and eco-sustainable tend to come up first in the algorithm. So, using incentive for places like hotels and accommodation and tour companies to be mindful in the type of work that they're doing to help preserve really our world, so that we can continue to benefit from the joys and the wellness experience from travel. So I think it's something that we really need to consider. Remember, it's not just us going to see something. We're engaging with communities. We're building networks. We're building interactions. And I think that's one of the ways to look at is, it's not us versus them, right? It's all of us in it together. And how can other communities learn from us as a traveler as well? We really need to look at that integrated approach and really avoid this us versus them when we talk about travel, especially because when we talk about travel medicine, we're often talking about people traveling from high income to low income, and this is not the case anymore, right? And I think we need to look at all forms of travel and who are the people traveling, and the network of travel and the impact on the world.
Just to add that within ISTM as well, we've met a lot of progress towards becoming much more environmentally sustainable as an organisation. We've revised our international travel policy, and Anne and myself have been involved in that effort. That reduces carbon footprint per person significantly, 3 times greater carbon footprint if you travel in business, right? And then at the destination, again, we're trying to follow some of the advice that you've given. I think encouraging our travellers to engage more in active transport options at the destination is really important. Walk more, cycle more. If you have to hire a car, use an electric vehicle.
Gerard, you make a good point about the flights, right? Like trying to combine trips. So you're going for an extended period of time, trying to take direct flights over those with connections have less emissions. Daytime flights actually have less emissions than nighttime flights, right? These small decisions can make big impacts.
I think that we all need to be reminded that we're ambassadors, not only for our countries when we travel, but also for other future travelers. So like you said, you have to be respectful, conscientious, and conscious of what you're doing. Sarah, I'll hand it over to you.
Aisha and Gerard and Anne, you've all given us some food for thought here. And I think, as Aisha said, doing your research is really important. One of the other issues that's often raised when travelling is the idea of exploitation of people in the environments. So some of the places where you went to at high altitude, I'm sure, like Nepal, involved employment of Sherpas. And it's really important that that's done in a responsible way and in a way that doesn't exploit people. Did you want to talk to that?
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Sarah. We were always careful, at least in my experience, of engaging, local groups of people. So, and ensuring that their porters, people who carried the heavy bags to the next campsite, were adequately equipped. We saw really bad examples of that over the years, where people were wearing flip-flops, walking on very steep ground, carrying heavy bags. So we always made sure that we partnered with responsible local groups of guides and porters. It was the porters I was most concerned about. Responsible companies provide proper employment benefits for the porters. So if a porter were to sprain an ankle or fracture a bone from a fall or something, it would be important that they would continue to be paid because their families absolutely depended on them. I know in Peru and Kilimanjaro and the Inca Trail in Peru, there are strict limits on the weights the porters are allowed to carry now, and that's strictly enforced. And so it's important to make our travellers aware of this. They should be very, very minimalist when it comes to what they pack. Yeah, this is a really important point you bring up.
Thank you so much, Gerard, for joining us as a guest. I think it's been eye-opening and also a lot of lessons learned in regards to the benefits of travel, the health benefits. And I'm going to anticipate planning my next trip, which I think will be with Anne. We're going to be going to Brazil, actually. So I would love to hear just what your key take-home message has been from this podcast.
I think the key home messages, if I have two audiences here, one would be the healthcare practitioner, nurse, pharmacist, doctor. Try to extol the virtues of travel in the consultation. You don't have to spend long doing this, but at least highlight the fact that you are validating the traveller's reason for travel and mention some of these benefits. They may not even have thought of some of the benefits. They might be able to derive greater value from the trip, especially if they're a traveller that could stand to benefit more because of a pre-existing mental health disorder or some kind of, physical infirmity. And, not just the people with a chronic condition, but their carers as well. Travel can be a very important respite as well if you're in a very demanding caring role. So think about that and have a more balanced discussion. I think people are more likely to follow your advice about reducing risk. And then for the traveller, everybody, all of us are travellers, could we be more prepared for our travel, be more responsible as travellers, and engage in active travel at the destination? Try to improve our diet. Mediterranean diet is very cardioprotective, good for your heart. So, you don't have to go to the Mediterranean to enjoy it, but maybe could we eat a bit better, rely less on processed foods and red meat when we travel? Maybe. Drink less alcohol? Maybe. Certainly practice safe sex, very important for our travellers, and we should give that advice. G.K. Chesterton said, the traveller sees what he sees, or she sees. The tourist sees what they've come to see. Try to be more the traveller than the tourist. The traveller has a more open mind and is prepared to be transformed and will probably benefit more from their travels.
I don't think there's much more to add to that. So thank you guys so much. Gerard, Sarah, you guys were fantastic.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's great, Aisha. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Anne.
And hey, if you really like the podcast, please leave us a review. Reviews are really important to us, and we'd love to read some of them out on the next episode.
So that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you to our sponsor, the International Association for Medical Assistance to Travelers, located on the web at iamat.org. Don't forget to follow Travel Unravelled on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast platform. We'll post fun clips and extra resources on the ISTM website located at learning.istm.org/podcast. We're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and Instagram at _ISTM_. Travel Unravelled is brought to you by the International Society of Travel Medicine. Finally, and thankfully, Travel Unravelled is produced by Ghost Bureau out of Toronto at ghostbureau.com.
Please remember that the information presented in this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It should not be considered medical advice, nor is it intended to replace consultation with a qualified healthcare professional. The views expressed by the hosts and guests of this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or policies of the ISTM or any medical or other health professionals, hospitals, clinics, or healthcare facilities. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, the medical field is constantly evolving, and there may be new findings or developments not included in our content. We encourage our listeners to consult with their healthcare providers for any medical concerns or before starting any new treatment. Neither the ISTM nor any of its affiliates, sponsors, producers, hosts, or guests are liable for any direct, incidental, consequential, indirect, or punitive damages arising out of access to, use of, or inability to use the content of this podcast, or any errors or omissions in the content hereof. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this information as a substitute for, nor does it replace professional, medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare providers for guidance appropriate to your specific health situation. Thank you for listening to Travel Unravelled. We are committed to sharing knowledge and fostering discussion in the pursuit of better health and well-being.